Hi, and welcome to Thete Gaming, and I'm afraid there's another battle report not here. Microphone failed badly, so another audio solution will be attempted next week. So I'm going to replace it with some thoughts on the duration of Games Workshop's flagships instead. Starting off with Warhammer 40k, because that's what was supposed to be here. Basically, I've been thinking back to how games of 40k used to go when I first played it many years ago, compared to now, since I came back to the hobby. And I was thinking of discussing a few major differences. Age of Sigmar as well, but that'll be for later. But in this video, I want to talk about the game duration. Basically, 2,000 point games are the standard. It's what the game is balanced around, as far as it is balanced at all. Yet it's incredibly difficult to play this in a relaxed manner in a reasonable amount of time. Now, in tournaments, people have less than 3 hours to play a game, like 2 hours, 30 minutes, something like that, sometimes a little bit more. And the board is already largely set up for you. The terrain's already in place, at least. And you've got mostly knowledgeable players as well, not usually novices. And it's a rush then. So what I wanted to talk about are the elements that add to the duration, most of which could also be considered complexities, which coincidentally, when I was thinking to myself, the battle report's gone, I might do this video instead, I noticed Tabletop Tactics discussing this week purely from a complexity point of view. And they did have a number of good ideas for solutions in one major area, but I'm just going to focus on the things that I'd sort of been considering. And from my point of view, it's less about complexity, it's more about the time it takes. But of course, complexity affects that. Now, one major issue, of course, in 40k, I think that stands out particularly as a big difference from years ago. I played like 3rd, 4th edition, is stratagems. Now, I like the concept of stratagems. The basic concept of stratagems, that you can use these things just tactically. You've got a limited resource of them. It's not like every turn you can use this thing for this unit. It's not like a unit ability. Is really good. But it's a problem, and it's a problem for each player. It's a problem for yourself because some armies have a lot of really powerful stratagems that you could forget about one and then realise that you could have swung the game with it. And again, the way it's done, I have to produce cheat sheets so that you've got the stratagems by phase that can be used for that army. Because obviously if there's a stratagem that's used for Unit X, but you don't have Unit X in your army, you don't need to include that one in your list. But even then, just reviewing it and thinking to yourself, is there something that would be useful at this point, takes time. But it is also a problem for your opponent because they're going to be even less, or they're less likely to be familiar with your stratagems. They may be someone who plays all the armies a lot and doesn't have much else in their life. But how can you play tactically against that when you don't know what it's capable of? You can know the basic rules of a unit, but if you don't know how this stratagem affects it, you don't know what it's capable of. Like, for example, with my Necrons, I can spend a command point to do some mortal wounds clustered around the target of a Tesla weapon. I can auto-explode a Scarab Swarm for 1 CP. It deals D3 mortal wounds. I just pile in that Scarab that was only on 1 wound anyway, whatever. I'm going to spend a CP. It's going to do D3 mortal wounds to you. You're there thinking, I can take Scarabs. All of a sudden you've got a Marine gone. I can spend a CP to have a 50% chance of just bringing back a dead character. They think, I'll kill that character. 50% chance of bringing it back at the end of the phase with D3 wounds. The difference between knowing about these things and not is the difference between being able to have a sound strategy and not. So to play at your best, you need to be familiar with all armies. It's not realistic. I play too many armies as it is, and I don't have enough time to really get to grips with all them. I play all of them in a very amateurish way. You'd have to play 40k and read all the books as the sole use of what would also have to be a considerable amount of free time. And this is assuming that it is your only hobby and that you have a lot of free time to dedicate to it. Plus, you have a ready access to a lot of different opponents to play again to hone your skills. Reading about it's one thing, you need to play it to get it stuck in there. But stratagems in general, incredible source of complexity for the game. Now, the general idea of them, as I say, is brilliant. Absolutely love it. I really wouldn't want them to be removed. I don't see stratagems as the obstacle here. The issue is that there are too many. And it's worse for some armies than others. Like, again, going back to my Necrons, which I played this week. Unfortunately, you're not going to see it, apart from a few things in the background. It was actually a fairly manageable. It was actually quite a good game from my point of view, because Necrons have limited numbers of useful ones. So for the army I took anyway, you know, they have as many stratagems as anyone else. It's pages of them with 9th edition codex, but most of them are for specific units. So once my army doesn't include that unit, I just remove it. So the number of stratagems that I can use for them is relatively modest. It's still a lot. It's probably more than there should be still, but it's nothing like, for example, when I consider my Death Guard or Adeptus Sororitas, for which there's a lot more general ones. Necrons don't have that many core stratagems. So I didn't need to spend as much time preparing a list or even thinking when I'm looking at the list about what I could do each phase. Not that this helps the opponent, because there are still loads of potential stratagems that they won't know about unless they study all armies. Now, in terms of game duration, it just takes longer. Like with the points increase in 9th edition from 8th, you know, significantly fewer models on the table. In theory, that should make the games quicker. That should have made the games quicker. But the games still take a long time. In fact, another feature of 40k compared to when I first played, like I say, 3rd and 4th edition, is that it can all be over in a couple of turns now as well. That didn't used to happen. I'm going to make the same point with the Age of Sigmar thing and go, well, the game can be over in no time. This is why lately in tournaments we've noticed banging lots and lots of blocking terrain there, just to stop someone shooting you off the board, because it's so powerful now, shooting. It was always a shooting game, of course. It's so powerful now, you can just be shot off the board straight away. You know, in the Necrons game I had, my opponent brought Deathwatch, and he had, I can't remember always the names of the different types of Dreadnought, but there was a Dreadnought that basically deleted things each turn. It deleted my Doomsday Ark, then it deleted my entire squad of 5 Locust Destroyers. It just deleted things. You know, so easy. And we've got blocking terrain on it, just not as much maybe as we should, perhaps. You know, the game itself lasted 3 battle rounds, and in reality it actually lasted 2. We just played the 3rd because there was something to do, but it was gone after the 2nd. And each battle round takes less time as more stuff is destroyed. So it's not like, oh, if it takes you so many hours to play 2 battle rounds, it's going to take, you know, another 1.5 as much to play the whole thing. Of course not. It's quicker each time. You've got less to do. But we played 3 battle rounds before it was all over out of the 5, and it still took several hours. You know, in the older editions, games went the distance, at least in my experience. I can only base it on my experience. And with the latest 40k, I can't remember the last time I played a 5th battle round, and it's not just because of running out of time. There has been some cases like that when we've played at the club. At the club, you've got a limited amount of time. When I'm playing someone here, I've invited someone here, we haven't got a limited time. But I can't remember a game in 9th edition that has gone to the 5th battle round that I have played in. And that is, you know, same with Age of Sigmar, really, but I'll talk about that in another video. And that's a totally different issue as well. Now, if it was a tournament, yes, we'd be playing more quickly, because you have to. You've got the timer there. You know, you have to get it completed, and you have to get it completed in time. But deliberately making yourself play more quickly only makes the game more complicated, because you don't have time to consider tactical options as much. It's a less fun game, because no one really wants to have forgotten something really crucial. That's not fun. You want a good game. You know, but playing at a natural pace, the games are taking several hours to not even play the full 5 battle rounds. That in itself is an objective indicator of complexity and the game taking too long. Even setting up the board for play, which in a tournament's done for you, but even setting up the board takes time. Doesn't necessarily take, I mean, it's quite efficient here. I can get it set out quite quickly, but it still takes time. You know, and I have a gaming area that allows this to be done. I don't have to have a ramshackle system in the dining room or the lounge or a bedroom or something like that. Still a good 10 minutes to roll for the mission, set up the objective markers, set up terrain so they're not on the objective markers, make sure we each know the mission parameters, and I think 10 minutes is pretty efficient for that. Then you add on the time to consider your secondaries. Again, you could do this really quickly and choose poorly. You know, end up getting a secondary that you get nothing from. Or you can take longer to choose more wisely. Then there's the time to deploy. Again, tactical considerations that take longer if you want to play better, or can be rushed for the sake of time, but then you make mistakes that can ruin your game. Obviously, top experienced tournament players are a lot more likely to be able to do this more quickly with fewer errors made in haste, but the bar is not set at the level of regular tournament players for the game. You know, the hobby can't sustain itself at that level. It has to be accessible to a much wider audience who might not even get one game a week, you know, depending on the time they have and the availabilities of players and resources. It's that last one that's the struggle for me. You know, I can only get one 2,000 point game every fortnight, and sometimes something comes up to knacker that. The reason for this is I play with someone each week for the 2,000 points, which I try and do the battle reports on, but we alternate between 40k and Age of Sigmar because we play both of them. At the club, at the local club, there isn't time to play a full 2k game, so they tend to be 1,500 points, and you know there's only a limited pool of players. And that adds another level of complexity, because at 1,500 points, you're playing the same missions as for 2,000, the same table size, but you have fewer units. Now, that means capturing objectives is a whole new ball game, and some armies will benefit more than others. The armies that can afford to sit back and shoot you off the board are going to benefit there because they can stay on their objectives and they'll still be useful. Someone that needs to push things up or spread things around, you've spread yourself too thinly, you know, and that's without even considering the time spent on working on lists better suited to the smaller point formats. I don't bother with that, I have to say. Just for a quick game at the club, I just cut 500 points from a 2,000 point list. I might have to massage it a little bit because I just treat those games as purely for fun, just going through the motions. But when I start going to tournaments again, which I don't know when that will be, but I want to focus more on a whole range of aspects of the game. You know, and then you consider this. So to play the game, you need to be familiar with the core rules. Now, I would argue that they are very well organised now. Still not perfect. It's still, you know, I can find quite a lot of rules fairly quickly in the new layout of the core rule book, but you do still have to hunt for some. Like where a rule might appear in two sections, Games Workshop don't bother to print it in both. Give you an actual example, my first ever game in 9th edition. Deep Striking In. You can't do it in turn 1 in match play unless you have some nonsense like a drop pod. But the rules on reinforcements didn't say you couldn't do this. It actually took us some time to find the rule. It was actually printed in the match play section of the big chunky core rule book. But why not just add it in the section on reinforcements and say that, you know, for match play, you can't do it in turn 1. What would be the harm of that? Fewer, you know, an extra line that would have made it much easier to look up the rule. So not perfect, but it is pretty good. I think it's better than it's ever been. Then you have the codex for your army. Loads of rules. Loads of rules. I was comparing the new Necron book with my old 3rd edition Necron's codex. I've still got that. You know, you've not only got specific rules for each unit, but you've got rules for sub-factions and lots of them. Pages and pages of stratagems, other abilities. You know, then it transpires that Games Workshop don't bother to critically evaluate their work before sending it off to print. So you have to download the FAQ that goes out with that codex. Not just that codex, but also the core rules, because they botched those as well. Then someone finds a broken combination, sweeps the tournament scene. So then there's an update to the FAQ, which fundamentally changes an entire rule. So that's not just an error correction or a clarification of something that you sort of guess wasn't right anyway, but actually changing something in the army rulebook. And this is to say nothing of additional supplements that will appear as the edition wears on, which have already started. So the game is incredibly complex, and it's complex compared to previous editions, and it's more complex compared to some other games that might tempt people, and takes way longer. And it's definitely too complex for it to be played in a reasonable amount of time for most people at a fun, casual level of play, you know, that would be balanced in most settings. And I've always felt that there's something lacking when playing either 40k or the fantasy equivalent of Warhammer when you don't play the standard points. You know, you can shrink the points down, sure, but the game just is balanced around that 2,000 points at the moment. And when you play smaller games, you're missing things because you're using missions for a larger army. And okay, you know, if you play too large a game, then there's just too much, and it's more like a mash. And yeah, you could play 1,000 point games. You could say, well, there's missions for 1,000 point games. But then that's less epic, and you've got a smaller range of units. So just objectively, I think the game, you need to be able to play it in a reasonable amount of time. I think you should be able to play it at a pace that an average player would play it at in 2.5 hours. You know, without having to rush. Just a nice, friendly game should naturally take no more than 2.5 hours. People playing at a normal, relaxed pace should not need more than that. And that includes setting up and deploying. But obviously, you can't always legislate for that, depending on how efficient it is. But we'll assume it's all ready and it just needs to be put in place when your opponent arrives. But I wouldn't get rid of stratagems. I wouldn't get rid of objective markers, even though they add to that time. And going back to the video Tabletop Tactics did, they had some good ideas that I hadn't considered. But it's not publicly available, so I won't go over those. But I will just go over what my ideas initially were. I mean, the first one would be, I think, to layer the games. That is, you present a core version of the game that doesn't have army stratagems at all. Maybe a few core ones like the reroll, command reroll. But, just a very limited set of stratagems and has a different set of core secondaries as well. Really simplify it. So you don't spend a lot of time thinking of secondaries. Really simple. You get your primary points for your objectives and then a set of given secondaries for killing units. They're just set. It's just set in the game, with the number of victory points dependent on ranges of points values for the units. That's it. It's just based on how many points is that unit worth. You get a number of victory points equal to like a tenth of it or something like that. No deciding on how you'll score it. It's set. So it's no time needed to be spent in the middle of the game, at the start of the game. From game to game, the way you're going to score it is the same. What changes for variety is the way the battlefield is set up, and the mission. And stratagems, core only. Don't use the Army Codex ones at all. The idea being, you play that, you build up your skills. You're still playing most of the game. You build up your skills, then you add in custom secondaries, wider army stratagems, not as many as there are now, and an additional set of rules. And you could call the basic version match play. That is your match play, your balance play. And then the additional rules you can call tournament play. Those would be your tournament rules. And it could be a separate section in the codex and the core rule books as well. Like you have a separate section for like Crusade games. Have a separate section for tournament games. And then that's fine for getting people into the game. But then what about tournaments? So you go into the tournaments now. Again, the pressure on time. Adding the rules as they are now, if you just add those on, the layering itself doesn't stop those being a problem. But you don't want to lose the interest that comes with a certain level of complexity. So my solution to that would really just be to scale it right back. We don't need pages of stratagems. We don't. What I would suggest is maybe have 2 stratagems for army-specific stratagems for each phase, for each army, just to help cover inherent weaknesses. Like if you've got an army that doesn't have much shooting, give them a stratagem that gives them -1 to be hit in shooting phase, something like that. If they've got no psychic, have one that allows a character to deny a psychic power as if they were a psyker. Something like that. The odd army has something like that. Have a small number of them, just allow you to spend your CP on covering a few weaknesses. You've still got a limited number of CP, so you still can't just spend them like confetti. It's not like you're filling in the holes in your army. You just, in crucial moments, getting to spend some CP to go, I just want to give myself a better chance here. There'll still be weaknesses in your army because you won't have so much CP that you can use them all the time. It's just something, and you won't be able to use them on every unit. Like even if you have the stratagem -1 to be hit and shooting, it will only work for one unit. But it's just something that lets you be tactical without the need for remembering dozens of plays. But those are my thoughts. I will have some more for Age of Sigmar, where I also think there's an issue. There may other be ones for 40k as well. But the Age of Sigmar one, again, takes too long, but it's a very different way. In fact, some of the ways Age of Sigmar avoids the problems of 40k might be reasonable solutions. But like I've said in the past, you don't want to mash the 2 games together. That game has its own issues. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.